Okay, cool. All right. So for those of you that don't know me, then my name is Barry Cranford. I know we've got a few people here that it's your first event. So I'm the founder of the London Java community. I'm not a developer myself. I run a tech recruitment company called RecWorks. So our belief at RecWorks is that recruitment can be a force for good in the industry beyond just getting people jobs. I believe it can really have a part to play in helping with learning and mentoring and development and all that kind of thing. And today's is exactly around that. So we've recently started this new group called Aspiring Speakers. I've got a few members here today. I think we've got about 40, maybe approaching 50 people in there now. And that's what this event is a part of that group, is a chance for to encourage new speakers to come up and get involved. And at the same time, as a chance for more experienced speakers to do something a bit lighthearted as well. So yeah, how we're going to do it, the talks should be a maximum of 7 minutes long. So after 5 minutes, I'll raise my hand, and then 6 minutes, and then 7 minutes. And then after 8 minutes, we'll cut the talk and move on to the next one. So any questions at all before we kick off with our first talk? No. Good. Okay.
What's the order again?
You are on first, Ilan.
Oh, okay. I better be ready.
Are you good? Are you ready? Are you all right to go?
Yeah. I'm
okay,
good.
Fantastic. As and when you're ready then, sir, take it away.
Okay. It says host has disabled screen sharing.
There we go. Try it now.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, so as you can see, it's my lightning talk for today, 26th of June. I'm going to be just briefly describing the gist of how the Meltdown vulnerability works, which shocked the world. And it is quite a shocking thing once you understand what it's capable of. And I thought, I know I'd heard about it a lot, but till I'd read through this article, which I referenced on the page in front of you, I didn't really understand sort of the gist of what the vulnerability actually is at its essence. So I thought that would be something nice just to cover in 5 minutes.
Ilan, we might be losing you.
Why not? There we go. So, sorry.
I think you're back now.
Okay, I hope you all heard most of what I said. In the next few minutes, I'm just going to speak about what Meltdown is, which in essence talks around why memory isolation is important and what hardware protection is. And then the Meltdown vulnerability itself, you just need to know 3 things. One, that uses out of order execution. That can influence measurable state, and then if you use that, you can encode everything and all the things are lost. So why do we care about memory isolation? Well, if you just think about it, if everything on your computer is available to be read by your computer program, then nothing is secure. It's as if there were no doors in your house. No matter what you did, people could still walk through it. So we normally believe that our hardware protects us from that. If your computer says it's somewhere that can't be accessed, you believe it can't be accessed, such as, for example, kernel memory. If that's not true, then nothing protects you in software. So cryptography won't save you, operating systems, authentication doesn't save you, antivirus software, all of it's all powerless. The only way to fix it is to change your hardware. So that's why we care about it. What was affected by the Meltdown vulnerability? Well, basically everything we care about. Windows was affected, Linux was affected, Android phones were affected, containers and microservices were affected. They were all vulnerable. So what happens? Well, if you can think about it, there's something called out of order execution, which was added to our hardware. If you look on the picture on your right, you can see a program. It's simply as a set of instructions, and then it runs into an exception. It then stops. However, in order to try to be clever, our modern hardware looks ahead in the program, and it can actually prepare stuff before you get to it so that it's ready, so stuff is faster. So if you have a memory access somewhere else in your program that has no discernible dependency on what you're doing, it'll look that up ahead and put it somewhere safe, so when you get to it, you can use it. The problem here is if you try to access something you shouldn't be allowed to, such as anything on your computer, and you put that in your program ahead of the exception, then that also gets accessed in the read ahead, and it gets put in a safe place on the side, and that's where everything goes wrong. So although there's an exception, it doesn't protect you if it's been read ahead and put somewhere safe on the hardware. So what kind of exceptions can you raise to have this problem? Any exception. Invalid memory access, dividing by 0 is an exception that fits into these categories. And how can you execute code that accesses memory anywhere on your computer? Well, anything. You can just have something running in a cloud service on a container, any app on your mobile phone, any JavaScript website can do just what I showed on the previous slide. So what does that mean? So if you have an invalid memory access that's out of execution, and it puts data in the cache, and you can keep your process alive simply by handling that exception in the code, so your process keeps running. You just need a way to send that information out of the cache that you can't obviously access. But if you can access that cache in some measurable way, such as by measuring how information in that cache is stored, you can find out anything. So essentially, if you can affect the cache in a measurable way, then you can see what was hidden in the cache. It's that simple. So the technical explanation is that a position on the cache line within any probe on the data depends only on the secret. So the data, the way the cache is effective is 100% dependent on the data you're not allowed to see. So you can simply encode it using some kind of mathematical approach like I've got described in the slide, and you can basically read that data. So what does that mean? It means you can dump the entire memory by iterating over all the addresses that are known to exist. Basically means that we guarantee that sharing a kernel, even though a container shares a kernel, it doesn't share information with other containers running in the same cloud environment, is now broken. So Meltdown would allow one container to read all the memory of all the other containers running in that environment. So what has been done to mitigate this? So Intel has released 9th generation R cores. So if you get the new 9th generation Intel R core, you're good. Alternatively, there is a software modification that has now all been implemented by all the major operating systems. But that means, of course, that you're simply avoiding the problem in the first place, which means all the performance optimizations disappear. And I'm sure you can all remember when the software updates were released that did this, everything slowed down around the world. Thank you. I hope you got a gist, which is all I was hoping to communicate about how this works and how dangerous it is. If you're interested in finding out more, here's the link that has a detailed explanation, and it's still free. It's free until the end of June on the ACM Digital Library. Actually, everything there is free. I encourage you to go read, find out more, and learn more. Thank you. Find out more about me on GitHub and LinkedIn. And as I said, I'm Ilan Pillemer.
Thank you very much, Ilan. If everybody, or at least a portion of you, could come off mute and just give Ilan a little round of applause, then that'd be really appreciated. So thank you very much, mate. And under 7 minutes as well. Again, it's becoming a bit of a habit. I like it. It's a good habit. Yeah, another part of this aspiring speakers group is feedback. So one of the key things that you need when you start speaking is feedback from people to let you know what you're doing well, and feedback, any kind of development areas, any specific things that might be worth working on. So Dom has already sent out, now just see on the chat, a link to a feedback form. So I'd really appreciate it if some of you could offer Ilan some feedback on that. His name should be, Dom, is his name ready to pick from a list? Yeah, okay, cool. So yeah, just any good points, anything there to that you'd want to hear more of and that kind of thing. It's all great to know. And Chris will be ready to kick off with you in a minute or so. Are you all sorted? You're ready to go, ready to screen share?
I am, yeah.
Beautiful. Cool.
Sorry, in a minute or so, or now? Sorry, now. Okay, fine. Yeah.
A minute or so, 1 minute. Just to capture some time to give some feedback and just some thoughts there. So yeah, obviously if it's just the nice bits, I'm sure Ilan would love to hear it. But yeah, I think this is good. We ran one a few weeks ago that where things went a little bit over each talk, and so yeah, so I think we're now getting into this this place where I like it. It's like a well-oiled machine, Dom. I think it's all going well. Okay, great, cool. Okay, Chris, if you're good, then if you want to go ahead and share your screen, and then I'll set the timer going.
Okay. Can you see my screen? Yeah. Okay, great. So my name is Chris Melikian. I'm going to give you a short introduction on GraphQL. So what is GraphQL? It's a query language for APIs, basically. So it's nothing like SQL. You expose what can be queried or mutated, so you don't have all that that kind of freedom that you have in SQL, but you can just control your API very easily and very clearly for your clients. Implements a CQRS pattern, the command query responsibility segregation. So if you're reading data, you use a query, and if you're changing something, you use a mutation, and they're separate types for each of those two different types of interaction. You use a schema to define the API, and it can be a text file or it can be programmatic. So I've had great success with a text file. So we can design that up front. We can design it in a meeting room with lots of people or online or whatever, and we can share text files via email. It's very flexible, or you can do it programmatically as well. So GraphQL resists versioning. It's not immune to it, but one of the criticisms of REST is, where you've got the API /v1/v2, etc., can make it quite difficult to see what's going on. But GraphQL prefers an evolutionary approach and has the concept of deprecation built into it as well, which kind of helps a little bit with evolving your API. And it originated from Facebook, but is now used by many big organizations at scale. So when is GraphQL appropriate? So in my opinion, at the edges of your network, so your public API, or providing individual backends for front ends per client app or set of client apps. You can tailor your API for mobile if you want to just have a different set of data for compared to your or interactions compared to your web app, for example, or iPhone app. And this is kind of the model that we used for in my last role. So we had GraphQL fronting a set of REST APIs, which we had in the background. So we had a number of REST APIs and mainframes at the very back end, and all the client saw was the GraphQL API, and they didn't see the mess that we had underneath, which we could then fix and make much better without affecting what the client APIs or how the clients were using the API. So I'd like to give a short comparison between GraphQL and REST. With GraphQL, there's just a single endpoint. There's no, with REST, you have many different endpoints and many HTTP verbs and things like that. Generally, you only use HTTP post on a single endpoint, and then the query mutation or whatever is in the body of that HTTP request. GET is also supported, but then you run into URL length issues if your query is very big. So most people use HTTP post, but you can use GET as well. So a single HTTP request in the REST world is basically maps to a single operation. In GraphQL, you can have multiple queries or multiple mutations. So that makes the API much less chatty, and it can mean that you get your response as one big payload, and that can be useful for your clients to be able to get everything in one go rather than have to wait for things to arrive at different times. So GraphQL only works with text unless you base 64 encode any binary data, whereas REST, you can use any type of data in the response. With GraphQL, you can choose what's in the response. So there's a big response graph that you can get, lots of different types. I'll show you in a second. With REST, you get what you're given, basically. And I'd argue that it's very friendly for non-developers, as we'll see. So this is an example GraphQL schema. We have some types here where you can see we have some built-in scalars such as strings and booleans and ints and things. And we have the input types and the non-input types, so the query types and the input types. We also can create custom scalars. So, for example, if you want to create a postcode, so you can have a field which is just a postcode field, so you can build validation into that, and more strongly type your model. We have enumerations. You can also have the concept of interfaces, and you can define your queries and your mutations. Yep, thanks, Barry. You also can deprecate fields, and then tell the client which fields to use instead. That helps with the evolution of your API. I'll show you a quick sample query and response. So here this is the query, and we're only asking. We actually list what fields we want. And in the response, you can see that that's the field the fields that we've received. Potentially, we could have a lot more fields if we wanted, but we only request what we need. That helps helps with bandwidth, and it helps us to not deliver data that isn't needed on the client. So, because the schema is strongly typed, we can do some interesting things with it. For instance, introspection. So, we run a special query against the API. Our APIs, and we can do interactive querying with it. So there are editors which we can use to do that, and we can have visualizations. So we can generate this automatically, which is very nice. So in summary, I think it's great for public APIs and backends and for front ends. The schemas are easily understood, especially if you use text files. They can evolve naturally. Queries can be used in multiple contexts because of this different data that you can retrieve. The tooling is mature and well supported, and it's fun to use. And I've got some links here, which I think might be useful, and you can get those from the QR code that I've got in this slide. So thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Chris. Appreciate that. Okay. Thank you very much then, Chris. And Carly, if you can make sure you're getting ready to set up then. Again, Dom, Carlo, if you wouldn't mind posting the feedback form again. Should be. I don't think there's any other comments, is there? No, it's perfect. So if anyone's got any feedback at all for Chris, that would be great. I think we've probably got a few minutes. If anyone had any questions for Chris at all on that, just while we're just waiting before Carly, then feel free to unmute and ask.
Hey Chris, this is Carsten. Thanks for the talk. One question: you mentioned in one of your last slides that the GraphQL schema can evolve naturally. What does it mean if you have an old client that's using an old schema and a new client using the new schema? How does that work? How does it compare to REST API?
Yeah, sure. So you can add fields without the clients knowing about them. So if the client doesn't know that a new field has been added, it can't request it in its query. So it's very easy to add fields. Where you have the issues are where you're changing a field to make, for example, making a field nullable instead of non-nullable. Then you might hit problems. But then you can, I think the query, the combination of being able to add these fields without the client knowing about them and the deprecation, I think gives a slightly easier path to making changes to your API. You still have problems if you want to remove a query or completely change your domain model, but I think it's easier than REST to solve those problems.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Carsten. Right, Carly, if you're ready to go, then yeah, I'll start the timer. Go ahead.
Cool, thanks, Barry. So as technologists, learning is part of our jobs, inevitably. But what happens when we take a break from working altogether? So today I'm here to share my tips for learning while you are on long-term leave. So let's start with a bit about me before I go into some of the learnings I've found on my own journey. So my name is Carly. I'm a senior software engineer at Morgan Stanley. I regularly discuss tech, UX, and agile topics on the listed Twitter and Medium handles, so do go check me out. I'm a mum to the little happy, energetic 10-month-old that you see in the picture there, and I love to learn. So we spend a large portion of our adult lives working. Eurostat estimates that the expected working life duration of EU workers in 2019 was going to be 35.9 years, which if you think about it is quite a while. So given this is such a large portion, it's only natural that at certain points we might want or need to take a break. When we think of career breaks, we do tend to jump to the maternity or paternity leave justifications, but we definitely shouldn't forget that there are other reasons why people take breaks, some of which are depicted here. But returning from any portion of leave longer than the usual summer holiday can be quite intimidating. The rapid pace of technology change means it's difficult to keep up during such life events when it's one of the kind of minor focuses that you have. So how can we remain engaged with tech learning through these periods of leave? Well, I have a couple of suggestions for you. The first thing to note is it's natural when you're heading out on periods of planned leave to try and set aside some goals. So in 2019, when I went on maternity leave, tech learning was a focus for me. I initially committed to 3 goals, which in hindsight were rather unrealistic. I decided I wanted to learn React, I wanted to write a book, and I also wanted to work through a very large reading pile, a backlog of books. How many of those do you think I managed to complete? Absolutely none of them. That book has still not been written to this day. It took me 6 months to finish 1 fiction book. On reflection, the goals that I set for myself were far too big. So when you are taking a career break, I would suggest start off with really small goals that you can build up as you manage to achieve them, which makes it, more positive when you finally do meet them and far less frustrating if you don't. The second thing we should think about is embracing different formats. So many of you, including myself, when we were learning how to study at school for exams, they talked about different models and learning styles. You might have seen the BARC model, which I've brought up onto the screen. But what we should think about is learning through life events. The default method that we normally use might not necessarily work for us anymore. So based on what happened to me, I have rated each of the mechanisms I either tried or thought about trying through my past 1.5-year journey, ranging from green, which was downright easy, to the dark red, which was absolutely impossible. And while I could go through many of these observations, the key one I want to highlight today would be about the podcast versus books comparison. So for me personally, pre and post maternity leave, reading technical text while I was commuting to work on the train worked really well because it was my me time that I could use. But when I moved on to maternity leave, and even recently with COVID-19, moving to working from home and juggling childcare and working full time, books didn't seem accessible anymore. I didn't seem to be able to carve out that time. But what I found was podcasts were something I could do when I was working on a mundane task and just listen to them in the background, such as if I was doing housework or if I was taking my son around a walk on the park on Friday afternoons like I used to do. But I found it interesting that a format that I'd never considered before was now how I was consuming the majority of my information. So it's definitely worth considering what formats work for your circumstances. This next item might sound odd to cite in a talk on tech learning, but it's important to know when to hit the pause button. To be an effective learner and to continue to enjoy doing it, you need to know when to take a break from it. So both myself and my husband put tech to the back of our minds when we started each of our portions of parental leave. Because at that moment, we were focused on learning how to be parents, not technologists. So when we came back to learning, we were excited about it, we wanted to do it, and it worked with our pace going forward. So hopefully, some of the insights I've shared today will help you on your own learning journeys, regardless of whether you're considering taking leave or trying to fit learning into this crazy world that we're in at the moment. Some of the items I've listed might not work for you, some of them might, but you learn more from your failures than from your successes. So I do urge you to try things out, experiment, and see what you can find out in your own learning journey. If you want to find out more, do reach out. Here's my handles. You can ask me questions after. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Carly. Appreciate that. Again, if everybody would be happy to add feedback, that would be great. That is a brilliant picture, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, the beginning when you first go into parenting, and there is so you don't stop learning, do you? I think if anything, you learn at a much faster rate, but just a slightly different thing.
Exactly.
But yeah, very very interesting tool, very unique. Anybody got any questions at all that they wanted to ask, Carly?
I've got a question. Any podcasts that you'd recommend?
It depends on the topic. And I think maybe one thing I'd add is if you're considering podcasts, think about what topics you want to find out about first. So for me, the ones that I looked at were for Angular, Agile, and UX. So some of the ones I liked were Agile Book Club, because although I wasn't getting time to read books, I could actually get some feedback on maybe some of the ones that I had on my list. So that was nice. Is it Adventures in Angular was a recommendation I thought was really good. If you're looking for one on UX, there's a couple. I think there was one in particular which was What's Wrong with UX, which does have some, definitely has some kind of mature language in it, but it was really insightful, and they were quite short. But also non-tech topics. The TED Talks Daily podcast is great because it has so much variation and things that you can pick up that you might not consider if you're focusing on just tech topics. So I'd probably recommend those 4.
Thanks, Carly. Imogen, are you good to go? Are you screen sharing from your side?
No, no screen sharing.
No worries. Going all to the camera. Perfect. Okay. Well, as ready as or whenever you're ready, then I'll hit the timer.
Oh, okay. Hi everyone. My name is Imogen, and I'm a student at a boot camp. I want to give a talk about some of the things I've learned after building 8 projects using pure HTML and CSS. The first thing is about ID selectors. If you're building your HTML and you want to style your components, you're tempted to use ID selectors. It's very intuitive and easy to use, but the problem is that although they give specificity, they're hard to override. So imagine you have multiple web pages and you've used ID selectors to like style. You have to override each and every page, which is very tedious. So my recommendation would be to use classes to style HTML components. They are usable and they're easy to change. And a fun fact is that ID selectors can be used to anchor pages. The next thing I learned is about using semantic tags. With HTML5, we have the introduction of semantic tags, which give meaning to the content in your web page. They also help the browser. So the browser gives priority to content based on the semantic tags. They can be used by web crawlers to identify the different types of data that a web page may have. And apart from that, they make code readable and manageable, and they help other people who are working with your project to be able to understand the way you've structured your project. An example of a semantic tag is like the article tag or fig caption that you can use instead of just using a div to section your page. Another important thing about semantic tags is the fact that they can be useful for CEO optimization, in that search engines place a high priority on the content according to their placement on the HTML structure. So if you use the tags, then CEO optimization will be easy for you. Then we have web accessibility. It's not only humans who use the web, we have machines and people with disabilities. So using these semantic tags will make it accessible for them. And it's also good for proper web rendering. The way your web page is rendered using HTML is that everything is loaded according to the structure in the DOM. So if you use semantic tags, then things of higher priority will be loaded fast, which is important. Another thing I learned is about syntax organization, which is very important. I had problems with errors, missing braces, opening and closing braces, and you can't really identify where you have a missing brace. So indenting your code is really important to keep it neat and organized. You should indent nested elements to lessen the time spent on debugging HTML. For example, if you're doing collaborative projects, then on your text editor you can set the space tab to be the same as your partner, so that when you're doing a pull of the project, then you don't have to go and correct the indentation. And you can also use double quotations for consistency and easy readability when you're using your HTML. Another thing I learned is about organizing code with CSS. I was working in a collaborative environment, and my partner used to do that. Like, he used to comment like, this is the nav bar, and he would put all the nav bars of our projects in one place. So for me, it was easy to go and look for a particular nav bar because I know where it is. So that's a good way to organize your code comments with CSS. And if you have a consistent theme across your project, for example, all the buttons have the same style, all the nav bars have the same style, then it would be a good idea for you to modularize your CSS for reuse, which keeps it consistent and easy to change. And it's time saving, and you'll be applying the principle of dry, which is do not repeat yourself. And in terms of links, you can link your CSS and JS files externally. You can use links, yeah, in your header. This is for readability so that you don't have like a lot of code. And if you have a large project, then that would be a problem. And increasing the page loading time, because external files can be minified, and it removes the white spaces and it makes your loading time faster. So those are some of the things I learned while building 8 projects, and I hope you've picked up something interesting or something you can use. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Imogen. Really appreciate that. Again, if everyone's happy to, or if some people are happy to add some feedback, that would be phenomenal. And yeah, I really appreciate you coming forward with that. Does anyone have any questions for Imogen on that?
I'll ask a question. So when you sort of start your next project, like, so you mentioned that you'd built these 8 applications, like what would you say, like I guess like the thing that you're going to do the most, like the first thing that you'll focus on when you start on your new application? Maybe it's like project setup, or what is the thing that's like kind of bit you in all of those like eight applications that you've built?
I didn't quite get your question. Could you repeat?
Yeah, sure. So if you're about to start a new project, what do you think like the most important thing to get right would be? Because there's also like little details in there. I'm just wondering, what do you think? If there's one thing that I could take away from this talk for my next UI project, what should it be?
It should be your CSS. You should really pay attention to your CSS. Like if there's if you see like there's repetition in your CSS, maybe it's time to modularize. That is, make components that are usable, or you can just use Sass, which makes it easier to style. That's what I would go for first if I'm building a project in HTML and CSS. So I don't do that anymore because I kind of moved to backend. But to make things easy, just use Bootstrap or Sass. It's really easy to use, yeah. Instead of writing your CSS like plainly, purely, yeah.
And you'd recommend going Sass over CSS?
It depends on the application. Sometimes it's easier to use Sass, sometimes it's easier to use SCSS. It just depends on what you're using, yeah.
Cool, thanks.
You're welcome.
Great, thanks Imogen, thanks Jim, thanks everyone. Right, so for the final lightning talk, I have an unpleasant surprise for you all, and that is that I'm actually going to be giving a lightning talk. So I've been spending the last few months trying to get everyone else to get involved. We had a slot remaining, and so Dom Carlo had the bright idea of me doing a lightning talk. So I've got something prepared. So I'm just going to share my screen and probably experience all manner of technical difficulties now. One second. Right, here we go. Can everyone see my screen? A thumbs up. Okay, Chris, can you hold a timer and let me know at 5, 6, and 7 minutes, please, mate?
Oh, that would be my pleasure.
I thought it might be. Hold on one second. Let me just see if I can, because I can't see the bloody screen. Okay, right. So anyway, my talk is called Everyone Has a Talk in Them. And it's my opinion on how to find something to talk about. So we, as I think you guys all know, this is good. I don't have to give an intro properly because you've already heard it. But we are currently on a mission to inspire and help drive a diverse new generation of tech speakers at the moment. So as part of that, we've put together this aspiring speakers group, which currently has, as I mentioned, almost 50 speakers within it. People that are looking to get onto perhaps being subject matter experts or keynote speakers, something like that in the future. As part of this, we've been speaking to everyone that joins and asking, what are the main hurdles that you see in front of you? You know, why aren't you speaking already? And the two main things that it comes down to are 1, nerves, and 2, topics and topic choice. So this quote, I think, really encapsulates what we hear quite a lot in a variety of different ways. I'm not sure if the things that I would have to say are something people would be interested in. And that really taps into what we hear a lot of the time from people. So I've been out speaking to a lot of different experts, so conference speakers, keynote speakers, and event speakers over the last couple of months to try and learn how do they cope with these things? How do they get started? How do they cope with nerves? How do they come up with topics and that kind of thing? So my solution to that, if that's the problem, how to choose a topic, my solution is to write the talk that you would have been interested in 6 to 12 months ago. And the rest of this talk is going to be explaining my theory around that. So part 1, start with you. Now this is a screen grab from a talk that was given at our very first Lightning Talk session. So some of you may have seen it. It was by a guy called Bruno Schroeder, who spoke about Gentoo Linux. And he spoke with such passion. He even got in his introduction here, very technical and passionate. And he didn't lie. It was so full of enthusiasm, and it was literally pouring out of it. I've heard on at least three different occasions, so 3 different interviews, people say that this will happen. If you speak about something you're personally interested in, your enthusiasm will come through. And you could see it there with Bruno in leaps and bounds. So the first thing I'd get you to do is to come up with 5 or 10 things that you're personally interested in, things that you can't help but look at. A lot of people talk about passion, and it's everywhere at the moment. Find your passion and follow your passions. But it's hard, or at least it can be very hard to find the true passion and to figure out what you're deeply passionate about. It's become a bit of a cliche, I think. So if you can't find your passion, look for your curiosity. It's a much more instinctive thing to find and to follow, and definitely to trust. If you're lucky enough to find your passion, great. But if not, look for your curiosity. Okay, technical difficulty. Here we go. So part 1, write your list of things that you're interested in, or curious about. Part 2, think of them. Think of the people that are going to be in the audience. So we've got Jim. He's obviously spoken today. I'm going to come to this interview that I had with him maybe a month or so ago, where he spoke through his process for how he writes a talk. So I'm sure he won't tell you, but he gave one of the most successful talks at QCon. And so to hear from somebody with this clear amount of success already, we were all listening. So he said that his approach was to think of the audience, to think of some personas of people that would be in that audience. So are you writing a talk for a student? Are you writing it for a CTO, a mid-level engineer? Find a specific persona that you're trying to target. And then think about, what do they know and what don't they know? So Jim said, and funnily enough, I heard you asking Imogen there, like he wants people from his talks to walk away with at least one thing that they didn't know about this topic, ideally 2 or 3. I hope I'm not misquoting you there, Jim. But he really wants people to be walking away with something that they didn't know before. And ideally, if you can blow your mind, if you can give them something that's like, wow, super interesting, then that's the real goal. So part 1, write your list of things that are interesting to you. Part 2, find the things that your persona don't already know. And part 3, when you're looking for your angle for your talk, keep it simple. There's this huge myth in speaking, especially for new speakers, that you have to think about, you have to create this original angle or this hyper interesting talk. Robin Moffat said it really, really well when he said, when he started speaking, he was trying to be techie and obscure just to kind of prove his credentials. But then he came on to say, and I've quoted this, I thought it was really nice the way he said it. It's on YouTube if you wanted to see it, but you've been through an interesting experience, you've got something to talk about, and people are ultimately there to learn. And that really is all that it comes down to. So I've got 3 ideas for how to get you off the mark, 3 ideas for things that you could run your first topic around. Firstly, getting started with something. Trisha G said, everybody has a getting started with something talk, a beginner's guide to. And of course, if this is something you're interested in, you should already know quite a bit about it. She in fact has run conferences and user groups for ages for MongoDB, and said that these are often the most popular talks, getting started with something. 2, we tried. So Matthew Gwynard from Oracle said that some of the most enjoyable talks he's seen are from people that have tried a technology and it's failed completely. He said they can be really engaging talks. Everyone's had some level of experience with a talk, with a technology or something that has failed. So getting that across is another idea. Idea 3, my opinion on. So no one can tell you you're wrong about your opinion. Cheers, Chris. So if it's just like this talk is my opinion to do it, you know, everyone's got an opinion. Again, if it's something you're interested in, then even better. So a talk you would have been interested in 6 to 12 months ago, if you pick something you're interested in, and you can either do a beginner's guide or, I've forgotten the last two, something you tried or your opinion, then that should have been a talk you would have been interested in. So, excuse me. Final thoughts. Ultimately, it's just a lightning talk. So Jim's popular talk started life as a lightning talk. So if this is an interesting lightning talk, if it's awesome, then great, go and build a conference talk. If it's not, you're only there for 5 minutes. So there you go. Thank you very much.